You know, just likes to give suspense.
Try again.
Microsoft advertising.
No, I'll be okay.
Tomatoes, donuts, toothpaste, sports clothing. What do all of these have in common? And it's actually nothing to do with health. It's that they're all made because of nanoparticles. Whether you realize it or not, nanoparticles have become an integral part of our society in many of our different applications. They can do that because nanoparticles are just one big term we use for many different things. Nanoparticles just mean something in the nano domain. They can be made from any form of material, metals, plastics. They can have different things on their surfaces. They can have all different interesting shapes and all different sizes as well. So we can engineer nanomaterials, nanoparticles, for a specific application. But then this creates a problem. Because if there's so many different kinds of nanoparticles, how do we know that they're all safe? Just recently, a few months ago, France decided that they wanted to get rid of titanium dioxide nanoparticles from all of their products. So if you like donuts, don't go to France anymore. They won't be the same. And why haven't we done the same thing? Well, it's not that we aren't as smart as France. It's just that it's only one small part of evidence that suggests that these could be harmful. So France has considered, oh no, that's dangerous enough for us, we'll just be out now. So we need to understand more about how nanoparticles are toxic to us and how they can change in different systems. Because this is only discussing nanoparticles when they're inside things like donuts. But what happens when we throw the donut away? They're also entering different environmental systems. They're entering our lakes, our rivers, our landfill, and they can change. Many different changes can happen. So we have an infinite number of nanoparticles with an infinite number of changes that can take place. One of the most common changes that is happening to nanoparticles in the environment is that natural organic matter will absorb onto their surface and change some of their properties, so how stable they are, whether they dissolve and break down into individual ions. So to try and allow us to do a prediction on whether these nanoparticles will be toxic or how we can engineer nanoparticles in a specific way that they won't be harmful, we need to understand what's taking place between things like natural organic matter and other things found in their applications with the nanoparticles. That's why at the University of South Australia, we have been developing a method to understand this interaction that takes place between natural organic matter and nanoparticles when there wasn't one before. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with natural organic matter, it's what happens when you give a pot plant to someone who likes to go traveling. They don't take care of it very well and it ends up dying. And when that plant goes from alive to dead, that dead plant stuff is natural organic matter. So it in itself is a broad mixture of different things. The method that we use to study this interaction is called Affinity electrophoresis. This involves putting a small amount of nanoparticles into a very thin glass capillary and then making them move through a liquid within the capillary by applying a voltage. The liquid that we place inside can contain the thing that they're going to interact with. So in our case, we use natural organic matter. Then as the nanoparticles move through the capillary, they interact with it, and this changes their movement through the capillary. So by changing the concentration of the natural organic matter present here in the carrier liquid, we can change their movement, and this change in movement we can relate to the interaction. You can see this change in movement here. It can be very subtle, but it always follows a similar trend, where eventually they plateau, and we have them no longer being able to interact with the natural organic matter. By plotting this change in movement here with a particular model, we choose the Hill model for modeling the absorption of natural organic matter onto nanoparticles. We can then get some information about the binding that's taking place. And so we simply need to know the movement of the nanoparticles without any natural organic matter. Then we need to know the movement of them when they're saturated with natural organic matter, and then all the in-between points. And by using the Hill model, we get this parameter here, which is known as the dissociation constant, which is related to the strength of the interaction that takes place. So the strength of the interaction means that how difficult it would be to pull the natural organic matter away from the nanoparticle. Or if you were to put the natural organic matter amongst other things there, how likely is it to stick to the nanoparticle surface versus other things? So this is very important in terms of knowing which things will stick to the nanoparticles and will change them in the environment. Now, when we looked at a number of different nanoparticles made from gold, silver, and different sizes, we got this horrible correlation here. So we couldn't get any distinct information about how size relates to the interaction, except for this one part here. Always whenever we're examining these small nanoparticles, around 10 nanometers in size, we were getting a much lower dissociation constant. And what this we came to realize was because the natural organic matter, so the dead plant stuff, most of the things in there, their size is very similar to 10 nanometers. So when you start to have nanoparticles very similar size to the natural organic matter, or the things that they're sticking to, you have a weaker binding there. Because this way, they're similar size, so imagine you're trying to hug someone, it's a bit harder to grab around when you're like the same size as them. But if you're grabbing something that's really big, like a huge pole, you can easily just touch on one surface. And this is why we see a difference in the interaction. But one difficulty here is this is using all lab-based experiments with lab-based chemicals. But what is an environment to you? An environment can be just the tap water that we're drinking. It can be a lake in China. It can be the lake near my campus. All of these things are environments, and they all contain different types of natural organic matter, as well as many other things in the mixture. So in order to simulate what happens in a specific environment, we need to be able to measure the interaction in that specific environment. So we thought, can we take river water or lake water from any particular place and then use it as the carrier liquid to study the nanoparticles' interactions? And well, we did. And we got this awful looking graph here as well. But although it may not look very pretty, we're still able to track the change in movement in the nanoparticles through this point just here. And then by applying the same model, we can then fit this interaction and get another binding constant value there as well, which means we can get system-specific information and then relate that to different properties of nanoparticles. So, in conclusion, I'd like to point out that there's a number of different nanoparticles that are present. Different sizes, shapes, sizes. So if we want to understand how they're working in the environment and whether they're safe, we need to be able to build a correlation between the properties of the nanoparticle and each individual system that they're interacting with. This way, we can understand what's happening in a particular system and then make better predictions of whether these nanoparticles will be safe for us to use. And then we won't have any problems when we're eating our donuts. So we hope this will help answer the question of whether nanoparticles are safe in the environment. And so my last point is that nanoparticles are everywhere. They're in your clothes. You'll be eating them on the pastries over there. You'll be brushing your teeth with them. But don't worry, because we're here to make sure that they're safe for you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, this is a totally new subject. I never heard of that before. I much appreciate your insight to myself into the nanoparticle research. Now, where do you see all this research heading to in the short and long term?
Specifically my results?
Yeah.
At the moment, we want to just build some very simple correlations if we can work out if particular parameters of nanoparticles really change what happens to them. So at the moment we have size. We also have some information about the salts that are around that affect that.
Yeah.
So in the short term, we want those simple correlations. The really long-term goal would be if when people add nanoparticles to a product, they have to do certain tests to make sure that they're safe as it is. But the government is always trying to build up new ways to work out where it's safe. And that's what happened in the French case. Like someone invented a new toxicity measurement they had to do, and in that measurement it did okay. And so they got too worried. So we think this will be something that they could add to that for maybe for the environmental part, but also in terms of if they added it to a cream or something, whether it would change that. So it's something to help develop the products better, so we know that they're safe, and so the government can add that to regulations.
Okay, thank you.
What kind of effects can you expect on a nanoparticle being adhered to by natural nanoparticles?
Like what changes would go to it? So far, the main thing that causes the nanoparticles to be toxic is when you break them down. So, for example, a lot of people presenting on solar cells, a lot of people like to put cobalt-based ones into those. And in their nanoparticle form, they're usually quite safe. But if they start to break down and release cobalt into the environment, then they become toxic. So often, natural organic matter will stick onto them and can actually be more beneficial in terms of reducing their ability to dissolve and release these harmful metals. Some literature suggests the opposite effect as well, like that they could make all the nanoparticles just group together and make a huge ball of metal, which then becomes toxic as well. But this is something that needs to be further studied.
Further questions from the judges? We open it to the audience.
So my question's about the donuts. So in France, they've gotten rid of the titanium oxide.
So then, I was told in July at a conference I was at, they were just like, breaking news everyone, we're not allowed to put titanium into...
So do they still have donuts?
So they put the titanium into icing sugar because it makes it really white. So they guess they won't have really white donuts anymore. It'll be slightly off-colored donuts.
Any further questions? Thank you very much, Andrew.